Okay. So you guys can sort out the verification letter later. So let's talk about the all-important final exam. 60% of your grade, so hopefully I don't have to underscore the importance. It is customary, I believe, for the instructor of a course to give hints as to what's going to come up in the final exam during the last lecture. I am not going to do that because it's stupid. I have spent hours coming up with a sample exam paper which mimics the final exam paper very closely. So yeah, all I can say is that you have to follow the lectures. There are recordings, and everything I say is not examinable, will not be in the exam, and everything that I don't say is not examinable is fair game, could come up in the exam. Okay? So in terms of the material, everything unless explicitly mentioned as not examinable. Okay. So firstly, but what I am going to do today is offer you a glimpse into what the examiner is looking for. Okay, so one of the most important skills in doing an exam is figuring out what you are required to do. What is the best way to answer questions so that the examiner will give you the marks? Right? That's a very, very important thing you have to do. It's basically a matter of second-guessing the examiner, right? So I'm going to open up my brain a little bit, figuratively, and let you peer inside it by going through the exam paper and showing you how, I expect you to answer the questions in general terms. I'm also going to start by giving you some general tips, some general ideas, some general advice as to how to do the exam. So, the first and foremost, most important thing that you should do at the beginning of the exam is read the question paper. Okay, you have 10 minutes reading time. So the version that I had posted originally on Moodle is wrong because it said reading time none, but actually I was corrected by the exam unit. They told me that there is 10 minutes reading time. Okay, so your exam will have 10 minutes reading time. I've updated the sample paper on Moodle. Okay, so don't be alarmed. There are 10 minutes reading time. Use the 10 minutes fully. Okay, so you're not allowed to write during those 10 minutes. You can only read the paper, and that time is very, very important. Okay, so what you should do, you should read through the whole exam paper, go through every page. Okay. Note, for example, that there is a box underneath to write your student ID and your test number. The student ID, but of course, is super important because this is what will identify your answer. If you forget to do this, I think the staff there will remind you. But even then, make sure you do it, but after the reading time, of course. So read through the question paper. Make sure you have all the pages. It happens sometimes that the question paper is printed wrong or something like that, and there are pages missing. That's the whole point of this thing underneath, page 2 of 16, page 3 of 16. Make sure that you've got all the pages. Okay, make sure there are no duplicated pages or things like that. It sounds stupid, but you should go through that. Okay. Read all of the questions methodically. In 10 minutes, you probably won't be able to read all the questions and think about all of the questions, but at least have a glimpse. What are the different questions about? So you go through the paper. Suppose you go through it. You have made sure that there are no, there are no misprints. Like you have all the pages, let's say. Yeah, you get to the end. By the way, this will be the back of the exam. Yeah, the exam will be second marked only in the case of failure. Okay, so if you get a fail grade, then there will be a second marker. Otherwise, there will only be a first marker. Okay, You can also request the exam to see the exam script at the end. Not at the, I mean, after the grades are released. So you can go to the school office and ask to see your script. That's your prerogative. Not sure what you're going to get out of that because, you know, the examiner won't be there. You won't be able to challenge the examiner or anything like that. But whatever. Yeah, if you feel like it. Okay, so you go through it. No duplicated pages, no missing pages, whatever. You read all the questions. Yeah, so you get a general idea. So you start, go, okay, question 1. Oh, it's about, let's see, demand, supply. Okay, that's one part. Question 2 is about, elasticity. Okay, so you do this kind of thing for the 10 minutes. Yeah, so you figure out, for example, which question you want to tackle first. Yeah, you are free to do the questions in any order you want. So. Think about that. Think about what kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who likes to do easy things first and build up? Or do you want to tackle the difficult questions first, you know, and get demoralized? Up to you, okay? So that's for you to decide, whatever floats your boat, okay? So that's the reading time. Note, in this exam, and during the reading time, of course, the instructions are exactly the same, but just in case, again, read the instructions again. Read carefully. Answer all 6 questions. Okay, I will come back to this point about answering all questions later. Write your answers for each part in the space provided. The blank space on the last 2 pages of this question paper can be used for rough work. There are 2 blank pages at the end which are labeled for rough work. That's where you do your rough work. Okay? Rough work and or any additional piece of paper used will not be assessed. I cannot stress this enough. You have to prepare for this, okay? I have made the exam paper in such a way that all the space that you need is there. If you ask for extra paper, the staff in the exam room, exam hall, might give you the extra paper. I don't care. It will even come. So at the end of the exam, you can even request, can you put the extra paper in the envelope, put it all together, and submit it? You can do that, yeah. I will throw away, well, not literally throw away, but I will not even look at the additional paper. So make sure you fit your answers in the space provided, okay? I would simply ignore any additional paper that you use. I will ignore also the rough work pages at the end, okay? So none of this, you start writing the answer and then you're writing basically your PhD dissertation whilst being an undergraduate, and then you put an arrow, please read the last page of the answer book, where I've continued the answer. No, I don't care, okay? I will not read the extra stuff. Why? Because if you're doing something like this, you're doing something very, very wrong. The space provided is an indication of the kind of answer that I'm expecting. If your answer goes well over the space provided, it means that you're writing way too much for that part, okay? And there's a real opportunity cost of writing too much in terms of the time you could have devoted, the time and effort you could have devoted answering other parts and other questions, okay? So just simply don't do that. If you're the kind of person who likes to write a lot because you think that's better, stop doing that, or at least do not do this for this exam. Okay, it is not going to help you at all. Try to write more concisely. If you have big handwriting, I know sometimes people say, I have big handwriting. Well, yeah, I've always set exams like this. I have big handwriting, you're penalizing me. Be that as it may, just for your own sake, make your handwriting smaller. Okay, so I just don't want to see additional bits of paper floating around and, you know, you start answering question 1A, then you go to question 5C, then you go to question 3B, and this is the kind of stuff that happens if people use additional bits of paper, okay? So don't do that. That's very important. And as I said, this is related to the allocation of time for the parts. You must allocate the time appropriately. So I will not be there in the exam. Okay, so I believe the way they do things here is the examiner sets the exam and then, you know, doesn't stand there in the exam hall. but in previous universities, I was there invigilating, and I can totally see the people who go on and use additional bits of paper, they don't stick to the space provided, are precisely those people who are getting obsessed with a question. You must not do that. If you're an obsessive type, if you're a perfectionist type, you must, at all costs, resist the urge to just finish the question, just clinch the question and neglect other questions. Don't do that. I can see there are people who, when answering an exam, doing an exam, there's like parts of the exam, there's like a fire in their eyes, like, yeah, I'm going to ace this question. Yeah, I know all about it. Yeah, and they write and write and write, and they go on and on and on. Don't do that. It's a very stupid way of losing marks. Why? The effort required in answering an exam question suffers from diminishing returns. It is very, very easy to get the first few marks of a question, very, very hard to get the last few marks. Don't waste time trying to get the last few marks by neglecting the first few marks of other parts and other questions. Okay, so this is the single most important thing you have to bear in mind about time management. Okay? Of course, you are probably used to taking exams, from A levels or whatever school level exams you have been doing, but this time is different. University is different. The exam is much harder, much, much harder, as you will discover. So what you have to do is, you have to balance your effort, spread your effort in a sensible manner. As I said, the first few marks of each part of each question are quite easy to get, very easy to get. Okay? The last few marks, very, very difficult to get. So, if you're really gunning for a part, question 2, part C, you really want to get all of the marks, for some reason you're fixated on that part, okay, fine, but try to get the last few marks by adding stuff that you think will get you those marks, only after you've covered at least all the other parts of that question. Okay? Don't get obsessed. Don't spend 1 hour on one question. I've seen people do it. It's obvious that people are doing things like that. Don't do that. That's how you get a bad grade. Don't spend too much time on any one question, on any one part. Okay, so look at the allocation of marks. Yeah, here. The all-important allocation of marks, the space provided to give you an idea of how much time you should spend on it. Okay? I hope if there is just one thing that you get out of today, I hope it's this. Yeah? So the other thing is, so I'm still talking in generalities before I actually go into the actual specifics of how to answer questions. The examiner, so what is the examiner's objective? What is the examiner trying to do? The examiner wants to pass you. The examiner wants to give you a decent grade. The examiner doesn't want to give you a very high grade. Okay, so this is basically the mentality of the examiner. The examiner, I and Noreen, we don't want to see failing scripts. We really don't want to see, because we'll have to double mark them. There's a lot of hassle that goes on with failing scripts. Okay? I don't want to see any of you fail. Okay? Some of you will, most probably, but still don't want to see that. We want to give you marks. Yeah, we really, really want to give you marks. But if you leave one part of a question empty, there is absolutely no way we can give you any marks. It sounds stupid, but people do it all the time. All the time I see exams where students have left whole parts completely blank. This is the second stupidest thing you can, actually no, the stupidest thing you can do in the exam, leaving bits blank. Don't do that. Write something intelligent, or even stupid, just write something. If you don't write anything, all I can give you is 0 for that part. It's just impossible, right? I cannot give you positive marks for having written nothing, or else when I get audited, they'll be like, okay, what are you doing? Did this guy pay you to give him marks for this exam? So write something for every part. Write something for every part, okay? Because that gives me a chance, gives us a chance to award you 1 mark, or maybe even 2 marks possible, yeah, for having written something. Something vaguely relevant. Or if you're really, really desperate, just even if it's something irrelevant, just write it down. Yeah, you never know. Just do it, okay? So time management of the essence. Don't leave things blank. Okay, so it's basically the same kind of thing that happened in the midterm, in the mid-semester quiz, right? I don't understand why people didn't answer some questions. That's just crazy. Okay, so don't do that. Write everything. At the end of the exam, it's better to just go through the exam rather than trying to get the last few marks of a part. If, let's say, you have 5 minutes left, just go through the whole exam again and check that you haven't left any parts empty, okay? And just write something for the parts that you ended up leaving blank, okay? So is that clear? I hope it's absolutely clear. I won't be there in the exam hall, as I said. If I were, I would go around like really, throwing fireballs out of my eyes at you if I see you leaving parts empty. But I won't be there, so you just have to imagine me doing that and make sure you don't leave anything empty. Okay? All right. So, a general question that I get asked all the time for exams. Should I write long sentences and paragraphs, or should I write bullet points? It's up to you. Okay? So you can do it either way. I personally don't mind so much. But writing in a structured form does have advantages. Okay? The advantage is this. Of course, the job of the examiners is to read everything you've written. Yeah? But examiners are only human. So sometimes, if I'm reading the 70th script, okay, I'm dead tired. It's been 3 days I've been doing this. I want to kill myself. And if you write long sentences all running together, I might miss a point that you have made. If, on the other hand, it's all well structured, it's labeled very clearly, even the text, right? So there's point 1, point 2, point 3, and so on, then it's more likely that I won't miss something. Okay, so I will come to some of the questions where this becomes more applicable. Okay, so you can do either. If you like writing long sentences, okay, but writing in a structured way reduces the chances that the examiner will miss something that you really wanted to say. Okay, if you write long sentences, put the most important information up front. That's another thing you can do. Okay, don't bury so I was grading the tutorial test 3 answers. Okay, so it was particularly painful when I saw that people, you remember one of the questions, for example, for the externalities question with the tradable permits is what is the total cost of reducing pollution, right? So there were some people who buried that tiny in the middle of a long paragraph. Why do that? The question asks you at the end, what is the total cost? Either put it up front or put it at the end, somewhere where it's clear. Right? No, it says long paragraph, blah, 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 blah. Oh, it's 300, blah, 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 blah. No, you run the risk of the examiner not seeing that 300 there, okay, if the examiner is very tired. So I promise I will do my utmost not to do that. I will take caffeine pills or whatever. But it can happen. So try to minimize that possibility by writing in a structured way. Okay? All right. So let's go through some of the questions, the style of the questions. What am I looking for in this stuff? For example, start with question 1, part A. So this is the type of question where I've set the question to give you the marks. I am there. I want you to get a decent grade. So here is something that you've done over and over again. You've even done it in a tutorial test in the past, right? So there is a market. There is what the textbook calls a disturbance or something, a change. Yeah. You have to depict that change, explain the consequences of that change. Yeah. So it's what I would call bookwork. It's something that you've learned, and it's just about tweaking it a little bit to the situation and doing it. Yeah? So, during the reading time, what you should have noticed is this. I did not bold and underline it for no reason. It's there for a reason. Yeah? So, coffee consumption linked to high blood pressure related health problems, that's a reduction in demand. Okay, so that's the first thing you should figure out, right? So, you can use a diagram to illustrate this. So the fact that it says explain in detail means that doing this quantity, price. There's a supply curve, demand curve, and there's shift in demand. Demand shifts to the left as a result of the health consequences of coffee. This is not enough, right? In detail means you do the thing that Lillian trained you to do. Yeah, you say, okay, this was. You can say something like, okay, originally. You can say this. This is fine. Yeah, but you should say it you should explain in detail what happens. So originally, the equilibrium price was P1, the quantity was Q1, equilibrium price was Then demand shifts. And at original price, right? There is a surplus, excess supply or something like that. Blah, blah, blah. And you do this in this level of detail when it says in detail. Yeah? When I say in detail, I'm not joking, okay? I'm not taking it lightly. It really means in detail. There are 5 marks, a whole page devoted to this. So you'd better say things like this, okay? Of course, I've gone against my own advice and written too big for this, but now I'll have to make the handwriting smaller. Yeah? And you do this. As a result, price falls, ... and and you go on and you describe it in this kind of detail. Yeah? So that's what it means to do it in detail. Notice the diagram is not particularly pretty. It doesn't have to be, okay? So you don't need to draw it with a ruler and different colored pens or anything like that. Don't waste time, okay? Again, perfectionism is not a good thing in the exam. Yeah? So I see in exams often students doing that. They take out 5 different colored pens. They take out the ruler. They start doing things very, very neatly and so on. Actually, the better way to do it is, well, of course, doing things neatly is good because the diagram comes out clearly, yes, but you also waste time. So just draw the diagram big so that it's clear anyway, even if you do things quickly. Yeah? Notice how big the diagram is here. I like big diagrams, okay? So let me... Of course, bear in mind the space. If you take up the whole space is taken up by the diagram, you don't have any space to write anything on. So, practice. Try to get the right balance. But don't come to consultation, okay, is this diagram big enough? As with that, okay? So just use your judgment. As long as it's clear, it's good. Yeah? So I can write here surplus. Labeling diagrams is good. Okay? Sometimes the question would state, I think later there's a question like that, carefully labeled diagram. And it will be underlined and bolded. And that means that the labels are super important. Okay? If I don't say carefully labeled, it's okay. The labels are useful. You get marks for the labels, but they're not the, absolutely essential. You don't have to label absolutely everything. Okay? So in this case, it doesn't say carefully labeled diagram. It does say in detail, so strike a balance and label everything that you think is relevant to the question, relevant to your answer, that helps you say something meaningful about this disturbance. Okay? Explain any assumptions you make. At that point, you should mention what you thought. So, for example, an assumption that you could mention here, and here I'm assuming, since the question says nothing about that supply stays the same. Yeah. So just here. Assumption, supply, remains unchanged. Okay? Also, don't worry so much about the handwriting, yeah? It's my job to decipher it. Of course, it should be legible, but I have quite a lot of experience reading really weird handwriting, so don't worry too much about that, okay? As long as it's legible, that's okay. Microscopic handwriting, on the other hand, as a way of getting around the restriction of space, not a great idea. Okay, so I'm not as young as I look. Joking. But my eyesight is getting worse by the day. I can feel it. So yeah, don't write microscopic. I'm not going to take out a magnifying glass to read what you've written. Okay, so I hope this gives you an idea of what I mean by in detail. It really means going through the steps of any change in demand, supply, how that eventually affects the equilibrium in the market. So let's say there is a question like this, yeah? And explain any assumptions. So that's the reason why you have to read the questions carefully. The question here says, explain any assumptions that you make, yeah? If you don't mention any assumptions, you've automatically lost marks. Yeah? So it's clear that the question is asking you to state assumptions, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't ask you for this. So you do it. Whatever the question asks you, you do it. You don't answer your own question. Yeah? People sometimes, I get the feeling, read something and then they interpret it one way. That's what he meant, even though there's something stated explicitly. Don't do that. Answer what the question is asking you. Okay? So do everything that the question is asking you to do. Here it says use a diagram, you use a diagram. Explain in detail, you explain in detail. Okay, so that's part A. Okay, I haven't finished. Of course, there's lots more that you could say about this. Part B. Suppose that you observe that in the last month the market price of a good increased while the quantity produced and consumed decreased, right? What can you deduce about changes in demand supply of the good? Illustrate your answer using diagrams, potentially. I should have put maybe parentheses. So this is a more difficult part of the question, right? So it's 5 marks. So each question will have easy parts and difficult parts. The easy parts are there so that you don't fail, or well, I'm trying to give you a chance for you not to fail, okay? To get a decent grade, to get 60%, something like that. Yeah, that's what the easy parts are for. Then there's the difficult parts, and the difficult parts are there so that you don't get a very high grade just by doing routine stuff, right? It's to create a curve. That's what the difficult parts are for. There is a curve. It has to be stuck to, okay? So not everybody can get 80, 90%. That's what the difficult parts are there for, okay? So be clear about that. Identify the difficult parts and the easy parts. So this is it, right? So you have to figure out, it's not that difficult though. The exam paper starts off relatively easily, I hope. So what's happening here, so you think about it for a little bit. So it's about changes in demand and supply. So it says changes in demand and supply. So it means that you have to think about changes in demand and supply. Good idea is to, if you're the kind of person who likes to emphasize, underline things, do that on the question, okay? I don't mind. It's not like I want to see a pristine exam paper except for your answer, okay? So do whatever it takes to highlight the important parts of the question to you. So changes in demand and supply. So it means that it's going to be something like the previous part, right? So demand and supply shift. You have to identify, but which ones are the relevant ones, right? So one possibility is this. So you draw a diagram. So it says that the price increases while the quantity produced and consumed decreases. Yeah. So suppose you have demand, you have supply. That's the original demand and supply. How could you get higher price but lower quantity? Well, there must be a movement along the demand curve, right? So this could be something like this, a supply shift. Yeah, that's higher price, and then you describe this. So in words, then you would describe the situation, right? Where the price goes up and the quantity goes down because there has been a shift in supply. That's how you could explain this observation. Yeah. So out of the 5 marks, that would give you 3 marks. Even if you came up with a really good answer, like really detailed explanation of this diagram, that would be 3 marks. Why is it not 5 marks? Because it is possible that both demand and supply shift. It's just that the shift in supply to the left is bigger than the shift in demand. there could be small changes in demand as well. That's the difficult part. Yeah? It's possible that something like this could have occurred as a result of changes in both. Yeah? But where the change in supply is bigger than the change in demand. So what I'm talking about is something like this. Now the diagram gets a lot more complicated. Yeah? Suppose the demand also shifts. It could shift in many ways, okay? Could shift. This is the way in which it would go against, right? So something like this. This was the original equilibrium. This is the new equilibrium. Yeah? So this is a possibility. Yeah? This is the most obvious one, right? Oops, sorry. This diagram is the most obvious one. So it's just a change in supply. Of course, it can happen. Yeah? But the question says, how could this have happened? Right? What can you deduce? You can deduce that supply will have shifted to the left sufficiently so that it outweighs any shifts to the right of demand. Of course, if demand also shifts to the left, that's not a problem, right? It will only reinforce the shift in supply. Yeah. But it is certainly possible that both demand and supply shift in opposite directions, but for the price to go up and the quantity to go down, it must be the supply has shifted by more than demand has. So that's how you get the last few marks of this. This is the 2 marks, right? You still have to describe it, but at this point you can be brief, because once you've described this, in enough detail, once you've described the top part in enough detail, then you can be brief about the second part, because it's clear to me that you understand how changes in price and quantity occur. Yeah. So this is, I put this in the sample paper just to show you how there are further depths to a question than you might think at first. Yeah? So you see a question like this, your initial reaction might be, what a gift. Oh, it's so easy. I know how to do that. Yeah? And you draw the diagram representing only a shift in supply. If you think that the latter parts of a question are very easy, likely you're missing something. Okay? You should think about it a little bit more. Yeah? If you can't think of anything, suppose, here's where time management comes into play. Suppose you came up with this, yeah, you got the 3 marks part. Of course, the question doesn't state that it's 3 marks, and indeed, the marking will be flexible in the sense that if somehow you came up with a really excellent description of this process, maybe you're going to get 4, yeah, just for that part. Unlikely, but, But suppose you got this, and you think there is something else that you should add, but you just can't think of it. Leave it and go to the next question. Make a note of it. I think there's more to it. Something like that, right? Suppose you cannot come up with this part. You just can't think of what else could you do. Then right there, to be continued. Or something, right? I want to add something. I'm going to write more. Yeah. So at least I know that you intend to do more about this. That's also a good thing. Signal to me that you understand that there are hidden depths to the question. You just can't reach them. Yeah? And then continue. Because if you spend too much time trying to figure this out, then you're not going to have enough time to do the easier parts, like the initial parts of the next questions, which could be quite easy to do. Okay? Yeah? Shift to the left. What do you mean? Yes. No, that's the point. Of course, it can shift to the left. If both demand and supply shift to the left, yes, you will get, for sure, that quantity decreased, the price increases, blah, blah, all of that stuff, right? But at least the quantity decreases. The point here is the question is just giving you this information. Price has increased, quantity has decreased. What can you deduce from that? A variety of things could have happened, yeah? Including this scenario. So what I'm asking for here is, okay, you come up with a basic scenario, which is a shift in supply, no change in demand. So here you are clear about that. Yeah? But show an awareness that there are other potential reasons why the equilibrium change in this way. This is just like the tutorial test question. Remember, there's a tutorial test question where the conflicting changes and there could be various outcomes. This is the, sorry, I shouldn't say just like, this is the reverse, right? You're given the outcome and you have to figure out what possible reasons there could be for that. Yeah? So here, the marking would have been quite flexible in that any awareness, I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly this diagram. Any awareness that there are potentially shifts both in demand and supply which lead to a change as described in the question would have been enough. Okay? So that's what I'm looking for here. Should a question like this come up? So, as I said, suppose you can't think of what else you could do. Yeah, you've filled up, let's say, half the page, don't know what else you could do, but clearly there's something else to be done, okay, if you're smart. Move on, okay? Come back to it. Make a note so that you can come back to it. You know that there is a bit that needs to be filled in, and move on to the next question, next part, whatever. Okay. So here, briefly define in words the term price elasticity of demand and describe 4 factors that influence it. Okay. Again, the importance of reading the question properly. Define in words. Yeah. I do not say define using a formula. I say in words, which means you write it in words. You give some kind of intuitive explanation for what price elasticity of demand means, and describe 4 factors that influence it. Okay. So, briefly defining words, you could write something like price elasticity of demand. You could say PED because you might use it later, as that's the point about reading the questions thoroughly. Later on, you will use this concept again in the same question. Might as well write an abbreviation that you can use, but you have to make sure that I understand what your abbreviation is. So put it there. Price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in demand of a good in response to a 1% change in its price. Yeah? If you wanted to be a bit more thorough, you could give some intuition. It measures how sensitive demand is to price changes. Yeah? Just one sentence that makes it clear to me that you've you have some intuition behind this. You're not just translating directly in words the formula. Now, if you write a formula here, I'm not going to penalize you. Okay, there's no negative marks awarded for okay, I shouldn't say no, because I suppose you could say something unbelievably stupid and that could give you negative marks, but that's very rare, okay? So generally no negative marks for writing down the formula, but it doesn't help you at all because it says in words, okay? It doesn't. Sometimes the question will, I might have set questions where it says something is not expected and it will get you no marks, yeah? So in that case, don't do it. There's really no point in doing it because it says even in the question, right? So here in words, so you should do it in words. And when you are asked to describe something in words, it's good to add some intuition, some, I don't want to say make it in layman terms, because of course you can't, this is a technical course, but you know, make it a little bit more accessible than just translating formulas into words, okay? So you define it like this, and describe 4 factors that influence it. If the question says 4 factors, you'd better have 4 factors. Yeah? Again, it sounds stupid, but you would be surprised. When I grade exams, it's always like this. It says 4, and people put 2 or 3. Why? Just make up a 4th one, then if you can't think of it. Make the 4th one a variation on the 3rd one. Do something to fill the 4. why are you not allowing me to give you the marks by leaving something blank? That's the same as leaving something blank. So what you do is, it says 4, you've circled it, underlined it, so I know that you understand it's 4. So factors that influence, PD are. Go number 1, and you write it out. Number 1 is, I don't know, it's the availability of substitutes. The availability of substitutes. Describe it a little bit. It means the more and closer substitutes a good has, the higher the elasticity. Right? 2. So here, basically, you're giving a glimpse into the fact that you know how the factors affect the price elasticity, right? So you're not just reciting empty terms, right? You understand the connection. 2, necessities versus luxuries. Necessities tend to have lower PD than luxuries. 3. What is the 3? Definition of the market. Yeah. The broader the definition, the higher the elasticity. The broader definition, the higher the elasticity. And then you're stuck. Number 4. What was number 4? And you can't think of the time horizon, right? These are the 4 that are listed in the textbook. By the way, the textbook is not just there for as a paperweight. You actually have to read it. So you have 1 month, just under a month. So better get cracking at reading the textbook. Number 4, what do I do? Can't remember the 4th one. So you should be in this situation. You should not be, oh, I'm done. Okay, that's bad. At least write 4, right? Get your brain going. I don't know. Maybe leave it blank and come back to it. Yeah, leave it blank like this. You've written 4, so there's a placeholder for you to, because the brain is amazing, okay? So there is a question in your mind, you go on and do other stuff, but it's still working on that question, okay? It's still doing something in the background. As you answer the other questions, it will come to you. The time horizon, yes, and you go back and you write time horizon. So that's why it's also good to just move on, right? Rather than getting stuck in a rut. Anyway, suppose you've done that, you went on to other questions, and it just didn't come to you. Okay, you forgot to read that paragraph of the textbook. So somehow you vaguely remember this because it was in the mid-semester quiz, but you can't remember the 4th one, which is the time horizon. Then just make it up. Okay, so definition of the market, necessity versus luxuries, the kind of good. It sounds stupid, but yeah, something. The kind of good. Is it I don't know. Travel has higher PD than, I don't know, and you come up with something. Just write something so that I can give you half a mark or something for it, right? Just do it, okay? As long as it's not really stupid, like has higher PED than, I don't know, or you say that travel has lower PED than staple foods. Yeah, if you say that, then you're directly contradicting yourself compared to number 2, right? So you should not say something that contradicts something you already said. But other than that, just write something. I want to give you the marks, okay? Because this is the easy part of the question. This is part A. It's the part that I'm providing for you to, provide the base marks. Yeah, the ones that will pass you, the ones that will get you, I don't know what it's called, equivalent of B or B plus maybe even. And then it says, describe how goods can be classified into necessities versus luxuries using elasticities. By the way, this is also another reason why it's good to read the question properly, because that would have given you a hint as to one of the 4 elements, 4 factors that influence PED, right? So, oh, necessity versus luxury. Suppose that was the one that you couldn't think of, then you go back and you put that in there because, oh, yeah, okay? But if you had read the question properly before, and you would have that in the back of your mind anyway. How can you do this? So this part is quite tricky, yeah? So a not so good answer would be this. Necessities would be goods with low PED. Luxuries would be goods with high PED. It's not that good because it's missing something. Okay, so it's missing the general. So the idea is, how can we classify goods into necessities versus luxuries using elasticities? So you could say, well, the good thing is that you've mentioned PED, price elasticity of demand, right? What you could do is, to make it a little bit more precise, you could say there could be thresholds. Let's say EL for luxuries, EN for necessities. So PED less than EN, that's a necessity. PED greater than EL, that's a luxury. And PED between these two, L, this is neither necessity or luxury, right? Because this is missing. If you just say high luxury, low necessity, you're missing a point, which not necessarily everything is a necessity or a luxury. I mean, it's just a common sense point. Yeah, it's not even specifically about microeconomics or whatever, right? So just think about the majority of goods are not necessities or luxuries. Yeah. So you could augment your answer like this, make it very thorough by saying, yes, there are these possibilities. So if high enough, basically the idea is high enough PED, I could term that a luxury. Low enough, you could say it in words, you don't have to write it in a formula. You can say PED higher than some level, I call it a luxury. Lower than some level, I call it a necessity. If it's in between, it's neither. You had a question? If you wanted, you could say something about income elasticity, right? So something like necessities tend to be goods with positive or negative? Positive income elasticity, negative income elasticity. It's a little bit unclear, okay? But you could try to make an argument. You could add it on to this, yeah? You could say something, but I mean, clearly what I'm looking for is this. Yeah. Okay, another question. I'm saying some thresholds. Sorry, thresholds. Here it says luxuries and necessities. So I'm saying, I've written it out in formula terms, but you could easily have said, if the price elasticity of demand is higher than some level, then we can consider it a luxury. It's lower than some other level, then we can consider it a necessity. Yeah, we can use those terms. You're free to do as you like. Yeah, it's not. I don't say here using formulas or anything like that. So you can use words as well, but I've chosen to do it this way here. Yeah. And what role do intrinsic properties of the goods play? None, because if you remember from the textbook, the idea is that whether the price elasticity of demand is high or low is a function of the preferences of the consumers. It's not about the physical properties of the good necessarily. The preferences are all that determines the price elasticity of demand. So here you would have intrinsic properties play no role in this definition beyond preferences. Something like this, right? Just in general terms, make it clear that you know that it's the preferences that determine everything rather than the intrinsic properties. This is a rather maybe obscure sentence in the book, but it's there. Okay, so everything that is in the textbook is fair game, yeah? So, part C, give an example. Good or service with very inelastic demand, good or service with very elastic demand. So this is related to the previous part, so helping you out. So think of basically something that where the price elasticity demand is very low, right? Something that you just have to consume, let's say. Again, explain any assumptions that you make. Yeah, so you can draw the diagrams, look at the deadweight loss, all of this stuff, right? So example, when I ask you to give examples, give an example is fine. Even examples that we've studied, fine, no problem, unless the question says an example other than the ones we studied or examples other than the ones listed, then you must not give examples like that, okay? If the question states that, it's because I want you to think originally. Think of something that I haven't necessarily, an example of something that you understand, but I haven't necessarily listed explicitly in class. Yeah. But other than, if it doesn't say that, then you can recycle examples we've covered in class. Okay. So here it doesn't state that, so that's okay. So I think we talked about what did we talk about in tutorial? It differed by tutorial, but could have talked about inelastic demand. Could be something that people are addicted to, maybe. Right? You could talk about, I don't know, tobacco for people who are habitual consumers of it. You could say very elastic demand. It could be, I don't know, travel. That's one possibility. Yeah. So pick an example, go for it. So here's the bit that I want to emphasize. In a question like this, illustrate using diagrams the difference in deadweight loss caused by a tax imposed on 1 and 2. The key is to draw the diagrams in a way that emphasizes the difference, if you think there is any. And there is, right? So the deadweight loss should be larger for the more elastic good, right, than for the inelastic one. There is bigger change in quantity and so on. So you should draw the diagrams to emphasize this. A common mistake is to draw the diagrams very similarly if the question asks you for a difference, and then it's difficult for me to see the difference. Yeah? So try to make it clear. The other point is explaining the assumptions you make. Here, the natural assumption to make is the elasticity of supply is the same for the two examples that I'm giving. Yeah? So you should state that. So you start off with examples. You can say something like, the examples are tobacco. So I'm not going to be very, very strict about how realistic your example is. I mean, you don't have that much experience about the real world and so on, right? You've been cocooned in the educational system. And yeah, you might not know so many things about how responsive demand of different goods is. So that's understood, and that's not the thing that I'm really testing you on. Yeah. So people could argue, tobacco demand is actually quite elastic. It's not as inelastic as you think. Blah blah blah. Doesn't matter. Okay. As long as it's clear to me that you've put in some thought into picking something that is relatively inelastic, that's fine. And then too elastic, you say, let's say you say travel. Something like that. You explain a little bit because people are addicted to it. Yeah. Given the extensive anti-smoking campaigns by governments around the world, or even here actually, the remaining people who are smoking are to some extent addicted, even though you might not admit to it. Okay. My dad smoked smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for 20 years. He was, I can quit anytime. I was like, okay, why don't you quit? No, I don't want to. I'm happy smoking. That's addiction, okay? So even though oh yeah, I can do it. Travel because it's a luxury, something like that, right? You just give some justification why these are very inelastic, very elastic. And then you draw diagrams, something like this. So there's a supply curve. And you take care to make the supply curve more or less the same. And here you say, I assume supply elasticity is more or less the same. The same. Just state it somewhere. I know it shows in the diagram, but just state it somewhere, right? And then you can do the example. You can do something that. So that's sufficiently different that you can illustrate your point, right? The same. So I suppose you should say, for the same tax, amount of tax per unit. Sorry, I should make it clear, unit. So this was the original equilibrium. Then let's say there is this much tax. Tax. And you try to make that the same tax. Yeah. Demand, this is tobacco, this is travel, These are the deadweight loss triangles, so the one for travel is bigger than the one for tobacco because the quantity change is much larger, okay? Quantity traded of travel falls much more than quantity traded of tobacco, let's say. Yeah? And hence the deadweight loss triangle is much bigger. Yeah?
So don't you have to show the shift in the supply?
There is no shift. There is no shift here because the question is about a tax imposed on the two goods, right?
So, but when you impose the tax,
Oh, I see. Okay. I understand what you're saying. So again, fine. That's actually an excellent point. You could say, I'm assuming that the tax is imposed on consumers and demand shifts. I'm assuming that the tax is imposed on producers and then supply shifts. You can say either of those two things. It doesn't matter. The question is vague about that. Good point. So if you wanted to talk about the tax levied on producers, you could do that, right? I assume a tax levied on producers. And then you draw something like this, right? Now, you don't have to do this, right? Because, for a tax, by the theory of incidence, it doesn't matter whether it's levied on the consumers, on the producers, it's entirely equivalent. And the question doesn't state explicitly, so you could just leave it without specifying. Yeah? It's fine, because, as I said, it's part of the theory of taxation, that it doesn't matter who you do it on, if all you care about is the deadweight loss, right? Even if all you care about is the incidence, it's the same. Still, if you want to make that assumption, then state it explicitly. Say, I am assuming a tax on producers, so I will assume a shift in supply. Okay? So you could do that. Thank you. Excellent point. Okay, and you describe in some detail how this comes about. Why is there deadweight loss? You can add that. A brief description is because the quantity traded is below the socially optimal one because there are units that generate some surplus but are not being traded, blah, blah, blah. You can say all of those things. Yeah? But the key is to highlight the difference in deadweight loss between the two. If you draw a diagram where the two are very similar, yeah, then it's difficult for me to give you the marks because you haven't shown to me that you understand that there is a difference. Yeah. So be clear about that. Yep. So here the key is difference. If instead a question asks you to look at the similarities within something, then it's the opposite, right? You don't need to, you shouldn't make something, if you're illustrating things, you shouldn't make them look wildly different. If it asks you to show that something is similar between two cases, then you should try to make the diagrams show the thing that you're being asked to show is similar. Yeah? So follow what the question is asking you. What is meant by the incidence of attacks? You just, and by the way, here. Sorry. Oh, it's frozen. Okay. Briefly describe what is meant by the incidence of attacks. Yep. I haven't underlined it so that, and boldened it, so it's not a huge deal, but briefly, right? Look at the space, it's not that much. Look at the marks, it's 2 marks. Yeah. This is not an invitation to write everything you know about the incidence of attacks. It is not. This is a common mistake because you think, oh, well, I've read that chapter and I really remember everything. I'm going to give it all. No, don't do that. That's going to be a waste of time. Briefly. So you can just state that the incidence of attacks refers to on who the burden of taxation falls by how much. Something like this, and that's, good enough. Okay? You don't have to give the full theory of incidence in the space for 2 marks. Yeah. So it's up to you how much you want to write, how much you want to expand on your answer. Yeah. But do it within the limits of the space and the time that you should allocate to the question. Okay. Illustrate on the diagram below and describe briefly. Now I've really emphasized it. In words, my God, what is this like? The incidence of attacks so you draw the diagram here, right? On the space provided. So there is a trade-off here. That I've done everything, I've done half the work for you, right? It's even labeled, so that's nice. But if you screw up, you have to redraw everything. There's not enough space. So do it carefully now. This is the one situation where it actually pays to slow down a little bit and do it carefully so you don't mess up. Because if you do mess up, then it's a bit tricky. Okay. Of course, you can use. I don't know actually. I don't know what the procedure here is. Yes, here I would use pencil but I mean the exam invigilators are not going to go around and checking that people are not using pencils or anything like that, right? I mean, at university, I've never heard of regulations prohibiting pencils. But, right? Use pencil, at least for this bit, so that you can erase it, yeah? But briefly describing words, yeah? So now it's underlined and bolded. So, and also the space is very little. So you should just, actually be very brief. You just say, look, this much falls on producers, that much falls on consumers. All I want is for you to show me that you understand which bit is the incidence on producers, which bit is the incidence on consumers. Yeah? Are they equal? Or is one much bigger than the other? This kind of stuff. Yeah? And that's it. Only 3 marks. There's the diagram plus the brief wording. So that's enough, okay? So don't go overboard. Again, the space will be a constraint, so you can't write too much for that. So you redraw the diagram, you have to show how much is consumer surplus, producer surplus, total revenue, after the imposition of a tax on consumers, okay? So this should be straightforward. So you basically show how much it is, and calculate their values. I don't know why it's so slow. Calculate their values. Which means you actually write down here. Consumer surplus. Has it been lagging like this throughout? Yes. No. Only lately. Okay. Don't know what's going on. consumer surplus equals, and then you write something. Producer surplus equals revenue equals. Okay, so you have to write all of this down and write the number. The question asks you to calculate, so you'd better calculate and write it there. Remember to divide by half because it's a triangle for the consumer surplus, producer surplus, or maybe not actually. There's a triangle plus the whatever. Explain how your answers would change if it was levied on producers rather than consumers. So the answer here is it wouldn't change because it's the same unit tax. By the theory of instance, we know that it doesn't really matter because the prices would adjust accordingly so that the instance remains the same. Yeah, so that's the key here. Let me try to reset this. Is it possible? Okay. Okay, better. So question 4, it's basically the thing in the tutorial test. It's identical, okay? I made it a bit easier so that here I highlight the fact that excluding any amount paid or received due to trading permits. Okay, so some people in the tutorial test got a bit confused and added that, but luckily also talked about the main cost. So that's fine, but it's basically that, okay? So you do the explain in detail your working means you actually show, you say, oh, this guy is buying permits, that other guy is selling them, and therefore he's C is selling to B or something like that, I can't remember. So you explain all of the things that you explained in the tutorial test. Suppose that the government used command and control quantity regulation to limit pollution to 20 units for each firm. What would be the total cost of pollution? It's the other way around from the tutorial test. Yeah, you do this. Compare this. It says compare. So you actually have to compare. You have to say, this is higher than the total cost that we found in part A. There has to be a sentence of that kind. If you don't state that, how can I give you the marks for it when it says compare? Right? At the end, there had better be the cost using command and control is higher than using tradable permits. Right? You must state this. If you don't state this, you're not comparing. Yeah? Just having found the number, let's say you find that here it's 700 and in the tradable permit case it's 300, that's not enough because the question asks you to compare. So you do that. Okay. 2 main methods of reducing negative externality. This is the quantity regulation and corrective taxation. Fine. What determines which one is more appropriate? That's the more difficult part. Okay. So it's a difficult concept. It's to do with the information available to the government, right? So basically, if you have more information, if you have a lot of information, let's say about the quantity that is desired, that is optimal, then you should go for quantity regulation. Let's say vaccination is an example. So when you talk about your answer, you could use some examples here. You could say, oh, vaccination is an example of where quantity regulation would be appropriate because it's really important that we hit the right number, right, the right quantity. But something like, I don't know, maybe, tobacco, it's not clear what the right quantity is, so maybe we should go for taxation. Something like that, which illustrates your understanding of the fact that it's about how much does the government know. Yeah? But it's not easy to put it in words. Okay? So it's not an easy concept to explain. It helps if you use examples. Okay? So this is the last part of the question, so you should expect it not to be that easy. Okay? So. And it's a concept that will be difficult for many of you to get to grips with. Yeah? So it's natural that this is for the last part. Fundamental features, the special fundamental features of a competitive market. Okay, there are several, right? So remember so one is, so the features are special features. So one is many firms. Another is identical product. And you explain a little bit, yeah? Identical product. Then you have free entry and exit. And you explain, okay? No need to be so extensive. It's only 2 marks. There isn't that much space for it. So just very briefly, you talk about what these features are, okay? It says, diagram not expected, will earn no marks. Don't draw a diagram. Don't waste your time, okay? Fill the table, quite easy, okay? So you just do it. It's just like the tutorial. I admit this question is rather easy up to this point, yeah? Oh, by the way, the version I posted, there was a problem. I duplicated the first part of the question for part C was the same as part A. I basically made a mistake. So I've edited. So what I meant to ask was which of the features in part A are necessary for the existence of a supply curve for individual firms in the market? Yeah. So this is the difficult part. Yeah. What's necessary for the existence of a supply curve for individual firms in the market? Yeah. So the 2 features are the fact that there are many firms and they're all selling an identical product because they will lead to price-taking behavior. And supply curves only make sense for price-taking firms. This is basically the essence of the answer. Yeah. So it would have to be many firms, identical product. Together, they imply price-taking firms. So you should explain what this means, right? Price-taking firms means that firms cannot influence price, right? All they do is they observe market price. They therefore observe price and respond by choosing a quantity to produce. This is what the supply curve represents. Something like that. Yeah, you make it clear like this that you know what the supply curve means. Supply curve represents 4 individual firms. Right? So you have to make it clear that you understand which of the assumptions it is. It's the first 2 basically. Many firms, identical product. What that leads to, it leads to price-taking behavior, and it's price-taking behavior that underpins the existence of supply curves. Yeah. If you wanted, you could add that without price-taking, supply curves don't make sense because, for example, a monopolist would choose price and quantity combination together. If you have time and you feel like expanding on your answer, you can say things like that too. Yeah. Just in case. But if you have time, the essence of the answer is this. Okay, so you could talk about contrast this with the monopolist. So contrast this with the monopolist who doesn't have a supply curve because they're not a price taker. Yeah. Many. Okay, so that's that. And it gets difficult, right? And it's under what conditions do firms in a competitive market make zero profits? It's the free entry and exit, right? When there is free entry and exit. Free entry and exit. And the process of entry and exit has been finalized or something, right? Has run its course. Basically, the idea you want to convey is that there is free entry and exit, and all of this has occurred. The free entry, as many firms as wanted to enter have entered, as many firms that wanted to exit have exited, and all of this is now at rest, in equilibrium. Then you get zero profits. So that the market is in equilibrium with respect to the number of firms. Right? This is the key. There's some kind of equilibrium. That's when zero profits obtain. When the process of entry and exit has not yet finished, when there's still profits to be made, when there's still potential entry, incentives to enter, then you don't necessarily get zero profits, right? So the zero profits only occur when entry and exit has finished. Yeah? As many firms as wanted to enter have entered, as many firms that wanted to exit have exited. That's the key here. Yeah? Some kind of equilibrium with respect to the number of firms. The number of firms is stable. You can use whatever terminology you want if that conveys the idea, yeah, to try to explain it intuitively what is going on. Now the next part, why would firms bother to be in business under such conditions? Yeah. So this is the classic question of, if they're making zero profits, why are they there at all? And it's because of the difference between accounting and economic profits. Yeah? So they're making zero. So the point to emphasize here, in this case, firms are making zero economic profits, but they might be making positive accounting profits. Right? So that from the point of view of the business owners, it might be worthwhile to run the business. So that from the point of view of the owners, it might still be worthwhile. To run the business. Something like that, yeah? So this would be the kind of answer that I would have expected from a question like this. And then there's more. I don't think there's anything that merits special mention. Question 6. Okay, but so question 6, part A. What's the condition here is MR equals MC, right? How does the condition differ from a competitive firm? We know in a competitive firm, MR equals P. So that's basically what this question is asking you to say. Natural monopoly. Describe 2 examples. Again, 2. I want 2, not just 1. You can give 3 if you want, but if it won't help you that much, just give 2 examples. Yeah? And why does a monopolist cause dead weight loss? So this is, an invitation to describe the problem that the monopolist creates of producing too little. That's the source of the deadweight loss of the monopolist. Okay, what can the government do to address this deadweight loss? I've left it flexible, so we basically go through the possible remedies that we discussed last week. Okay, and then that's it. So rough work, page will not be assessed. Bear this in mind. Okay, it says there. Don't forget, I will not assess what you write here. Try to be concise. By the way, here I've written quite big, yeah, because of the limitations, but still I can squeeze in the essential points, yeah. You generally will write smaller than I do, okay. And notice how crappy my handwriting is, so that you can rest assured I will not penalize you for handwriting that is a bit difficult, okay, to read. So again, because it cannot be emphasized enough, don't leave blank bits, okay? So what you should not be doing in the exam, right, is just going through the questions and you completely obsess over one part, right? And you're just furiously writing about one part and you forget about everything else. You should also not, completely despair. You have to keep a cool head. So it might happen that you get stuck and you say, oh my God, this exam is so hard, what do I do? And you just get stuck there and sit there staring into the void, reevaluating your life choices, okay? So that's not the time when you do it. The exam is not the time when you start reflecting upon why you are in the situation that you're in, how you should have studied more or anything like that, yeah? That time will come after the exam, after you see your grades. During the exam, just try your best. By trying your best, I mean, even if you don't know what's going on, just try to write something intelligent, even if the question doesn't ask for a definition of something. So suppose there is a bit. Suppose you don't remember what a natural monopoly is. It's possible, right? You come to the exam, you don't remember natural monopoly. What was this? Just write something. Yeah? A monopoly, give the definition of a monopoly. If you can't think of anything, fall back on definitions. A monopoly is a single firm that supplies the whole of the market. It's something for me to use to give you some marks, right? So don't just get stuck there and stare into the void. Write something so that I can give you some marks. But write something intelligent, vaguely intelligent, okay? It's very, very important. If I see that you're not doing very well in answering the script, yeah, it's by the way quite clear usually. You start reading the exam, and by the first 4 pages, you've kind of realized where this is going. Then I'm really rooting for you. I really want to give you the marks. So give me the opportunity to give you the marks by filling in every part of the exam. Yeah, can we make it a goal of this course for everybody taking the exam not to leave any blanks in the exam? Okay, so I say this every year to every course that I teach. Yeah, every year there are people who still leave things blank, inexplicably. I don't know how that's possible, but so let's hope this is the first time in my 10 years of experience that grading exams that there are no blank bits of the exam. Okay, so go through this again. Try your best at answering the questions. I have consultations right up until the final exam. Okay, I think the last consultation I have is on the 7th of February. Your exam is on the 12th, I believe. Okay, so go through this. This is something that is quite useful. Pace yourself. Find out how much time you need. Yeah, of course you'll be. I mean, I don't know what kind of person you are, whether you're faster in exam conditions than at home or vice versa. Some people differ, but bear that in mind. Time management, very important. You really want to write, you really want to cover everything there. Because as I said, the first few marks are easy to get. The first few marks are easy to get. The last few marks are very, very difficult to get. Yeah? It is very rare that people get 80, 90%. 90%, very, very hard. 100% unheard of. It's impossible, simply. In the 10 years of grading exams I've done, I've never, ever given 100%. It's just doesn't happen. It's impossible. The exams are always written in such a way that that does not occur. Okay? So if I don't see you during tutorials, then good luck for the final exam.